So the topic that we are going to discuss now is the change detection strategy. So as already discussed with you people, change detection is nothing but whenever a property value gets changed, okay, Angular needs to update that in the view. By default, it has, actually in Angular, there are two types of strategies are there. That is change detection default and change detection on push. So we are going to discuss that stuff now. Prior to that, I just want to create one component. So let me create a component called inner component. So I'll do the nggc, okay, the component called inner component. I don't want the spec file, so no dash spec, and I don't want inline style, so inline dash style. I don't want external style, so inline style. So if you want, you can just check the without, I can just give a dry run. Okay, so it's going to create and it's going to update that. So let me try that. So we have our inner component ready. So in the inner folder, we have the inner component. So in this inner component.ts, it's going to be a simple file where I'm just going to get the okay, I'm going to type it, you people can understand. Inputs employee. So you would have understood it by now. That is, we need to pass this. Okay, we are going to pass it from the parent component, that is from the app component. So what is this employee? Employee is nothing but I'm just going to have that as a model. In that models, we are just going to simply specify how that employee looks. So I'm creating an employee object, a new file called employee.ts. So in this employee.ts, let me export an interface called employee, which has ID, which is of number type, name is going to be of a string type. Okay, so we have inner component. Let me remove that interface. I'm creating a variable of that type. So employee, which is going to be of employee type. So import from dot slash model slash employee. So what we exported employee. So we imported it, and we are going to pass this as a through the property binding, so that it's a input property binding. And once you have the employee in my what is it, that component that is inner component.html, I just want to display the employee name. So you can better why to have a separate file. We'll have it in the template itself. In this template, giving a backtick div. So this div tag is having a h2. I just want to display the name of the employee. Employee.name. Nothing special. So here I'm closing that back. So you just take the employee and it should display that. Okay, let me provide that a class when. Now I'm just going back to my app component. In my app component .ts, I'm just going to create a variable of employee type. So employee obj, which is of employee type. Let me have the constructor. So in this constructor, I'm just saying this dot employee object equal to, it's an object which should have an ID 108331. Name, I'm just saying Karthik. So this is what the default employee is all about. Now I'm going to have two different function. One is change property, which doesn't return anything. Another one is change the object. Change object. So when I call this change property function, we are going to do one interesting part. That is, I'm going to change one of the property. That is, I want to change the name instead of Karthik to Ganesh. So to do that, this dot employee object dot name, and here I'm doing the same thing but in a different way. This dot employee object equal to, I'm giving a new one. Let it be a new name. So we have some methods here. One method which is going to just change one of the property of an object. Another one, it just changes the complete object. Okay. Now in my HTML file, in the body, I'm just going to have two buttons. The first button class equal to ptn dash primary. It says change the property. Okay, when I click, I'm going to call the function named change property. Whereas the other one is just going to change the object. So look at the output here. So there are two buttons, change property and change object, and I just want to render my after this, and horizontal ruler, I just want to display my inner app. So the selector which we have used here is app dash inner. So app dash inner, save it, and we can pass this employee object. We can pass this to employee object. This is property binding. This is how we need to pass. So in Angular, it's going to be in a unidirectional flow. So save this, the result. So we got that name. So by default, it just passed that name, right? So this is what the default value. So we have two methods, change property and change object. When I click the change property button, it just changing one of the property, whereas when I click the change object, it changes the complete object. That is the difference. Let me check whether it works. For change object, it works. It changed the complete object. When I click change property, it works. This is the default change detection technique the Angular should follow. Okay, that is, how can I specify it? Means you can specify that in your app component, I just want to, in the inner component, that is in the child component, you can just simply specify that with the help of change detection. So in this default change detection, the change detection strategy is dot, this is a default. In default, it works. Okay, if it is a default, look at that, it's in default state as of now. That is, this component is having a change detection strategy as default. It works for object, it works for a property change. But you need to, whenever you're talking about this particular concept, or this, when we are moving into this concept, we need to be very careful. Why? Because right now the default one is changed as default, right? How does it, how the application work, or how the change detection mechanism work, you need to understand. So to understand that, I'm going back to my app component.ts. I'm giving that as a comment. So there are two types of objects are there. One is immutable, another one is mutable. What is this immutable means? When the change happens, whenever the change happens with the immutable object, it gives a new copy. When the value change, or when the reference change. It will always give new copy. For example, if I say in, just an idea, I'm saying where I equal to 5, okay, then where j equal to I. Now I change the value j to 7. Will it affect the I? Whether I value will be changed? No, right? Because it is immutable. This is immutable. When the j value got changed, it never changed the I value. Because I, which is number, is immutable. In fact, all primitives are immutable. It has this behavior. So whenever it gives a new copy when change happen. You need to understand this immutable. Now I'll go for mutable. So in this mutable, I'm having where emp, which is actually an object, which is having id1 name Karthik. I'm creating a object called emp clone. If I make this point, and when I say where emp clone dot name Ganesh, whether emp will be changed? No, it will change because it's pointing that reference. So that is, if we access it, it will change emp.name as Ganesh, because it is just a reference, because it is a mutable. Objects are mutable. So when it is mutable, it use the same object, same reference, because it is referencing the same when changes happen to it. So how the Angular needs to work, in the sense Angular change detection mechanism is like this. It does a check whether the property value is changed or not. So if it wants to change, if it wants to check, it needs to maintain two states, right? The previous value state and the current value state. Then only it can understand, okay, the property value got changed. If the property value got changed, if it updates the view when the property value is changed. It updates the view whenever the property value get changed. So it needs to Angular needs to compare. Okay, Angular needs to compare the property. Angular will maintain. In fact, Angular will maintain the state of the property, that is previous and current. If previous and current value are not same, then the view will be updated, or I can say change detection occur. Is it clear? That's how it works. Now think about the mutable object. When it comes to the immutable object, it's very simple, like where I, okay, or number, I is immutable, no problem. So it has 7. When you click the button, it get changed to 8. So previous value of I is previous is 7 and the current is, let it be after 9. I'm just changing it. So does it need to trigger the change detection? Yes or no? Okay, in the click of button is click, changing the value of I to 9. So here change detection triggers. Because previous value and current value is not same, so change detection triggers and it will update 9 in the view. This is for the default behavior. But think about the object where emp equal to id1 name Karthik. Okay, so previous is this one. When the button click, we are changing only the property, the name, property to Ganesh. So see the problem for Angular, how much it's supposed to do. It needs to have two objects, that is previous emp.id and current emp.id. It needs to check like this. Then previous emp.name, current emp.name. If any of those things get changed, for if any property in an object change should trigger the chain reaction. So you're overloading. This is a default behavior. So, but we can make our application to work properly, okay, or you can improvise the performance. If you see this, if suppose I'm having a property which is having 40 properties, in that one of the value get changed, it needs to check everything. Have you understood the problem? So that's what the default change detection strategy, that is the default. But when I do it with if change detection strategy is set to just a minute. That's the default change detection strategy. If change detection strategy is set to on push, it will update only the complete object reference is changed, not for, it will just check the complete as a complete object. It will check the changes if the object is completely changed. That's it. Now look at this. So we are passing this employee object, right? But I am going to change for the inner component, instead of default, I'm going to change it to on push. When I do that, when I'm passing the data from the main component to the child component, okay, since I specify on push, the chain detection, okay, one more important point to remember here is, in a tree of component, in the last leaf node, if change occurs also, it needs to trigger from the root. Okay, for example, let me share my screen on look at this. In a tree of component, so it's a tree. Okay, if there is a change happens in this leaf node also, the chain detection needs to start from the root. It needs to start from the root, and it will just check all the components. Each and every component will have a change detector. It has a chain detector, this has a chain detector. It will just trigger the chain detector and it will just check. What is the work of the chain detector? It will just check whether the new previous value or the properties, whether it is changed or not. So imagine if you specify that on push means only if the I don't want to unnecessarily check everything. So if I specify it here, let it be in this particular place, I set it to on push. When I specify this with on push, this is on default. Okay, and it might have once again a lot of child elements. So when it's set to on push, hereafter, then any changes occurring Okay, when any change is occurring, it's not going to just simply trigger the change detection cycle. When here change occurs also, for example, if I do any changes here also, this it will trigger the change detection life cycle in this component, in this component, in this component also. Whereas when any change detection occurs here, it won't trigger it because I specified it as on push. Have you understood the logic? On push, when the chain detection will trigger in the sense one and only if the property, whatever property we are passing, for example in our scenario we are passing the employee, if the employee value changes, that too the complete object changes, then only it will trigger the chain detection only for that particular property. So in that way I can improvise my angular efficiency and I can speed up the angular. So once again I'm repeating, any leaf nodes, any of the leaf node anywhere in your angular component, if change happens, the change detection will start from the root and it will just trigger everywhere. But if you set on push, okay, when you set on push, it will trigger the change detection only the property, whatever property we are passing, right? If that property value, that to the complete object, that if it is a mutable object in the sense, if the complete mutable object is changed, then only it will trigger, otherwise it won't. So in this way we can improvise this. So that's what I have discussed in the PPT. Let me just share that screen with you all. Can you see the PPT? So this is a change detection. So by default the change detection will occur everywhere. Whenever any changes happens, it will just anywhere it happens, it triggers the complete change detection. It needs to check. That's a default. But what is a change detection? It will just check whether the previous value of the property and the current value is changed. If it is changed, the view needs to be get updated. But when you start using immutable objects, okay, we can with the help of the change detection strategy, we can specify that, like if you specify on push, we can avoid, for example, if I set the on push here, we can just check only this part. Okay, that too with observable, it does like this. So it's always good to use immutable object. So how to use immutable object? I'm having object which is a mutable object. How to convert it to immutable object means there are some libraries available called immutable.js. With the help of immutable.js, if I pass that, it will always give the new reference instead of giving the old one. Whenever any change occurs in any one of the property, it will automatically give a new reference for you. So in that way I can avoid checking that. And one more thing is like I can avoid checking the I avoid maintaining the different states for each and every property in an object, or simply use observable object. When you use observable object, we'll get this benefit. So now I just want to show you, I've just specified that on push. So when I run the application, hereafter when I click change property, see that it's not triggering because it is on push. Whereas change object, it will trigger. Change property doesn't, because we are just changing only one value. So the best practice says that whenever you want to change anything, for example here in the app component.ts, please avoid this. Use some immutable library, or else better use observable. Okay, because observables are by default it is immutable. Even though I pass the mutable objects, it can convert into immutable. So actually we need to use like this dot employee obj equal to, I just want to change the name, right? So we need to change like this. This is the best way. so that when I change it to on push, there is a complete change in the object. Then it will trigger and update the view. So this all about the change detection mechanism.